Well, today is both Columbus Day, as of now, and this is why you're asking the question, as well as Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm not aware of any discussion of ending that, either of ending the prior federal holiday at this point, but I know that recognizing today as Indigenous Peoples Day is something that the president felt strongly about personally. He's happy to be the first president to celebrate and to make it the history moving forward.
That's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on President Biden's decision to officially acknowledge Indigenous Peoples Day. He's the first president to do so. While Psaki claims there's no plan to eliminate Columbus Day as a national holiday, school districts around the country have already begun removing the celebration from their calendars. Columbus has been under fire for decades now from the left, who often present the 15th century explorer as a tyrant who left a legacy of genocide against America's indigenous population. The truth, of course, is more complicated. Joining me now, somebody who knows a bit about Christopher Columbus, the host of the Michael Knowles Show on the Daily Wire and author of Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, Mr. Michael Knowles. Michael, happy Indigenous Peoples Day. What are we celebrating on Indigenous Peoples Day? I'll start with that one.
Well, I can't figure out which indigenous peoples we are celebrating. You have the option of the Carib Islanders. The Caribs are the people who gave us the word cannibal in our language. When Columbus arrived, there were very peaceable, amiable Indians called the Taino Indians, but they had scars on their bodies. The scars were from the Carib Islanders, who would eat people and breed babies, which in the words of Samuel Eliot Morison, the Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard historian, the Caribs considered a particularly toothsome morsel. So maybe we're celebrating the Caribs. There were the Iroquois, were also cannibals. There were the Aztecs, sacrificed 80,000 people over the course of 4 days by ripping their still beating hearts out of their chests. And to invoke the former president, some, I assume, were good people. But it's a very broad category to say Indigenous Peoples Day, and especially when you're replacing the great explorer, Christopher Columbus, who, contrary to popular misconceptions, actually was a very great man and achieved wonderful things and did not commit the vast majority of the crimes that people accuse him of performing.
Yeah, why do they hate him so much? I mean, what do they say about him that's not true, and what should we know about him that is true?
Well, in the words of Carol Delaney, who's an excellent Stanford historian, wrote a very good book on Columbus, many of the things that they accuse Columbus of doing, he actually didn't commit. Other Spaniards did commit them, but Columbus did not. In fact, he wasn't a perfect man, but in many cases, he was actually arguing for leniency toward the natives against some of his more bellicose political rivals. Now, the problem is, while he was the greatest explorer of his age and perhaps ever, he was not a particularly astute politician. He was outfoxed by a lot of his rivals in the West Indies who wanted political power there. One of them in particular was a man named Francisco de Bobadilla, and he is the person who is responsible for a lot of the anti-Columbus hysteria. Most of the modern revisionist attacks on Columbus come from Bobadilla's writing, but the problem is Bobadilla is not a reliable character. He was gunning for Columbus and trying to take his job. So it would be like relying on a history of Donald Trump written by Hillary Clinton to ascertain whether Trump was a good guy or not, or vice versa for that matter. It's just not a reliable source. And actually, we have a lot of other historical accounts, including from people like Bartolomé de las Casas, first resident bishop of the Americas, great defender of the Native Americans, who, while acknowledging that Columbus had some problems, remained an ardent admirer and defender of his throughout the rest of his life. The reason they hate Columbus, by the way,
that was my next question, so just keep going. I want everyone to know, why do they hate Columbus?
The reason they hate Columbus is because Columbus is a representative of Western civilization. He was a man of low birth. He was extraordinarily intrepid, determined. He through sheer tyranny of will, he was able to finance his exploration of the Indies, which he thought he was going east. And of course, he ended up finding this continent in the meantime. And he was a devout Catholic, and he was spreading the gospel. It was the most important thing to him. He named the island he landed San Salvador. And because of this, the libs just hate his guts.
I want to play the sound for you from NBA coach Greg Popovich and just let you react to what he has to say.
Columbus Day, and we're going to honor that. And it's no knock on Italian Americans. That's a silly argument. You know, it's like saying we should be proud of Hitler because we're German. I mean, it makes no sense. It's about Columbus. It's not about Italian Americans. And so there are a lot of states that have come out and scratched the Columbus Day and made it Indigenous Peoples Day. But in our city, are we that backward that we have school districts that do that? I'm amazed.
I mean, I guess the good news is we've proven that you can be a multimillionaire NBA coach and still be an abject moron, so there is hope.
I think he ought to stick to dribbling because he clearly didn't pay a whole lot of attention in history class. I mean, as outrageous a comparison as I've ever heard to compare Christopher Columbus, a great man without whom none of us would be here, by the way, to a mass murderer or Hitler or something like that. Completely insane. But this is the popular argument. And even on his point about Columbus Day not having a connection to Italians, it's simply not true. The first Columbus Day was instituted in 1892. This was on the 400th anniversary of Columbus sailing the ocean blue, and it was 1 year after the largest mass lynching in American history, which was perpetrated against 11 Italian immigrants in New Orleans. And so there was a little bit of this, one, acknowledging the great man, but two, placating Italians and making them feel welcomed. The Franklin Roosevelt then reinstituted it again in 1934, and then it became a federal holiday under President Lyndon Johnson. So this was a holiday to represent the Italian American people and this one specific man. The Italian Americans have punched above their weight in American history. Verrazzano, Amerigo Vespucci, the whole continent's named after an Italian, and Christopher Columbus as well, a representative not just of that country, but of the whole civilization that now so many people hold in contempt.
What do you think happens now? Are we going to see the end of Columbus Day and its full-on replacement? I mean, I also think it's so interesting that they've done this instead of just establishing an Indigenous Peoples Day some other day. And as someone who's lived in New York his whole life, I can tell you there's a lot of this group or that group's day here that people, not a ton of people, no offense to Lithuania, but the Lithuania Day parade is not exactly celebrated as a national holiday. I mean, there's a lot of folks running around with their different days, but it seems like they've chosen to put Indigenous Peoples Day on Columbus Day in this White House as some kind of a rebuke. So does that just continue as is, or do you think that eventually one just replaces the other?
Well, Jen Psaki gave away the game when she referred to Columbus Day as the prior holiday. The prior meaning it's in the past and we're going to get rid of it eventually. Yes, Indigenous Peoples Day is just the anti-Columbus Day, and it's really the anti-Western Day. It's a little offensive, too, to Hispanics. Without Columbus, there would be no such thing as Hispanics. That's the joining of the Indigenous peoples and the Spaniards. So offensive to Latinos as far as I can tell. But also the reason I bring up the Aztecs and the Caribs and the Iroquois and the nasty lot of tribes that did a lot of very bad things among the indigenous peoples is not because I think all of the Indians were bad people. Some of them were very fine and amiable. But it's to point out that we only ever seem to judge the West by the worst things that ever happened, the worst crimes ever perpetrated, real and imagined, whereas we judge every other group of people only by the very best things that they ever did, and we ignore the bad things. It's a hideous double standard, and it's because of the self-hatred among many Westerners now for their own culture, which is a magnificent culture, or at least it was.
I think until we get a real full accounting of Amerigo Vespucci's position on the trans agenda, we might have to think about a renaming, but that's where we are.
You make a good point. Yeah. As always, you make a good point, Buck.
Good to see you, Michael. Thanks so much for being with us.
Great to see you. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day.